It's okay, you can talk. We're not in the library. We're going to wait for some board members to come up here. All right? So you can breathe. All right. You can have your playground voices right now. For our parents, thank you so much for coming out and bringing your children with you. We're going to do a couple housekeeping items. Mr. Acker is going to call the meeting to order. Dr. Vitale is going to make sure that everybody's here. We're going to salute the flag, and then the show is all yours, okay? And we can do all that in about a minute and 30 seconds, okay?
Okay, guys. All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen and musicians, welcome to the Abington Heights School Board work session for April 6th. We're so happy you're all here. And if we can please have roll call, Mrs. Vitale.
Mr. Abdallah?
Here.
Mr. Azar?
Here.
Mrs. Henderson?
Here.
Mrs. Karam?
Here.
Mr. Medensky?
Here.
Mr. Robeson?
Here.
Mrs. Tierney?
Here.
Mr. Acker?
Here.
Mr. Fleming is absent.
Mr. Fleming is absent. Okay. Can we please turn and pledge the flag? I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Guys, that was the best pledge we've ever had. Thank you. Okay. We turn the meeting over to you guys.
We have some certificates for you.
And I am going to do my very best with your names. You guys did an amazing job, and thank you so much. So Noah Boughton. Congratulations. Thank you, Noah. Oh, here, you want to hand them out. Mirabella Brown. Imogen Casp. Zenia Clark. Oh, yes. Quinn Davison. Joseph Ding. Dylan Farrell. Ronan Farrell. And I'm going to do my very best. Well, I'm probably not going to get it. Vid Gotti. Vid, say your full name for me. Vidignia, it's beautiful. Annie Henderson. Gianna Hobbs. Mauve Horahan. Maeve, I'm sorry. Maeve Horahan. Mackenzie Jenkins. Quentin Karam. Eden Kemmerer. Eden, I'm sorry. Tanner Klingel. Dimitri Luciani. Paige Melot? Wasn't right on either of them. I'm sorry. So, Alina Mitchell. Brady Navalenko.
Well, thank you.
Well, you're welcome. Molly Neitz. Ainsley Pace. McKenna Peters. Thomas Pivorato. Anything like those, Thomas? Delana Reese. Rachel Reagan. Rose Rossini. Nadir Ruddy. Kaylin Sabo. Say it again. Kaylin. Dominic Sunny Safarenko. Serafinko. I'm really trying, guys. I'm sorry. Ronan Schlink. Thank you, sweetheart. Thomas Sinkus. Ernesto Vasquez. Michael Vasquez. Will you? Thank you, guys. Alex Wagner. Ellie Warner. Isabella Wolf. Thank you. Guinevere Wolf. And very much so is Gemma Warraby. And I got like 40% of the names correct. So thank you guys so much for coming out. We do appreciate it.
They're the best. Like,
I'm worried about letting Maggie do roll call again.
I would be worse. She got 40%. I would get like 5%.
I would have gotten 5.
so much better.
Maggie should not be doing roll call.
Can we tell them they can move?
If you would like to move the chairs
Want
up,
to move your chairs
you,
up,
you
by all
can.
means.
It's okay.
Otherwise, you can also stay there, whichever.
Thank you, Mr. Sheehan.
Mr. Sheehan, thank you very much. Mr. Sheehan, thank you very much.
I'll go first.
I was trying to, I was kicking it over.
And then
to
Jim's gonna go after I go. Yeah, I'm gonna do my. Yeah, I'll do my. Yeah, exactly. So it'd be 2 back-to-back presentations. And none.
My display is, oh, there it is, it's back.
All right. So for those of you out in the audience, I'm just using the microphone because we purchased it. You're going to have the benefit of, we're going to have 2 presentations. I'm going to do my regular presentation on academic performance. This is the last one in the series. And then Mr. Mirabelli is going to do the budget, and then we'll open it up to public comment. Okay?
And because there are really no action and discussion items, we're just probably most likely going to have one public comment session, unless someone at the end of the meeting has further
So what do you
comments they'd like to make.
Just do your thing, I'll follow.
They can't. Okay. All right.
Dr. Schaefer,
All right.
the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm on slide 2. So I'm just going to bring everybody back a little bit to February, where we really started to review our students' performance data. And at every presentation, I reminded all participants that this is just one data point that we're looking at. And when we think about the outcomes relative to student performance, there are many contributing factors. And this is just one benchmark that we look at. In February, we talked about our English language arts performance. In March, we talked about mathematics and some of our post-secondary data, specifically where our students are at after they graduate 4, 5, 6 years out. Which brings us to April, and I'll be talking about science, social studies, and world language, and that wraps it up for us. The data that we'll be looking at would be grades 4 through 8 in PSSA and science. And I have to pause here just to remind people that science is the only area where we test in spans in Pennsylvania. So it's grades 4, 8, and then biology in the high school. And if a student was being assessed in 4th grade, that means they're also being assessed on some of the science that they learned in 3rd grade and 2nd grade and so on. And the same thing holds for 8th grade. And then I'll talk about the social studies and world language AP scores. So the first slide that I'm going to be showing is our 4th and 8th grade PSSA science results. And what you'll notice in red are the percentages of basic and below basic, and green, proficient and advanced. And the barometer that we use in Pennsylvania is proficient and advanced. And as you can see, the difference between 19 and 21, we had a minus 8.7%. So there is a reduction there. That may not have been as steep as we've seen in mathematics or English language arts. And I think in part, if I'm going to speculate a bit, it has to do with being assessed in spans, meaning we weren't measuring 1 year's worth of learning like you do in 4th grade ELA, 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade. You're being assessed on some of the prior knowledge that you've learned in science. So that may contribute to some of it. Either way, this is something of a concern that we're looking at, and I don't ever want science to be on a back burner, despite the state only assessing in grades 4 and 8. 8th grade, again, we can see 2017, 18, 19. We did not have any 2021 data for 8th grade, and this is something that we're working on as an administrative team, because the next time we're going to get a peek at their performance relative to state assessments will be in biology. And to be quite transparent, that's a little too late. So Dr. Vitale has been working with our science teachers to make sure that we can somehow get a formative assessment in here so we can see if we need to intervene in science prior to the 8th graders taking a state assessment. And that a state assessment in biology is important because it is one of the pathways to graduating high school. And certainly we would want our students to be successful there. The next slide is the biology keystone data. Again, I mentioned this. This is a culminating exam in high school for biology students. What you're seeing here is a drop by 16.4%. That is very steep and is something that we need to address. And when I say that we need to address that, I mean going forward, as well as thinking about what I just mentioned. Are 8th graders preparing for biology? How do we close the gap there to make sure that they have the requisite skills? And then the students in biology, they took this exam as sophomores, traditionally. And they're going to be moving up into our course of study in science. And they will need this background knowledge. And they will need, most likely, this knowledge when they get into college. So we want to make sure that we're putting the students in a position where they're going to be successful for not only the remainder of the high school career, but in the event that they want to pursue the sciences in college, that we can catch them up. The next is our science AP scores. And I'm going to preface this the same way I prefaced our other AP scores, is that we have seen a drop in AP test participation, not in enrollment in our AP courses. We have also seen an increase in dual enrollment programming, and that just shows how we're diversifying and extending our learning opportunities for high school students beyond AP. AP isn't the only gig in town anymore. Students have the opportunity to pursue post-secondary credit, different post-secondary science opportunities. But what you can see there in 2021 is the drop in student participation, and the passing scores seem to fluctuate by content areas. And I will tell you something that I discussed with Dr. Vitale and Mr. Snyder, and that is I'm going to wait until the end of this year to see where we're at, because COVID did impact AP participation in some way, shape, or form. I can't give you hard numbers. I can tell you anecdotally to families and students that I've spoken with that did not feel prepared as they were doing a lot of learning online or in a hybrid format, and that they just really didn't want to take the test. So hopefully we'll start to see a normalization here in the coming years. Next, we have the social studies. Same thing. If we see fluctuations, it may be in tests. We have a little bit more participation here. You can see that in human geography is very popular. Again, same pattern that we see here. We're still seeing high interest in our AP courses and high interest in dual enrollment. And then finally, we have world language. Again, we don't have a lot of participation there, but I just wanted to report that. That's something that, again, that we take a look at, we work on. What do we need to do to improve participation? Is it anything to do with programming? Is there anything to do with what they may be pursuing at the next level or not pursuing at that level? So I get to my final slide here, next steps. And when I think about January until now and talking about this data in public and to the board, the questions that I ask myself are, what story does our data tell? Is this a story that we want? If not, what might we do to change that narrative? And again, it's one piece of the puzzle. And there are other pieces that we are putting together when we talk to our teachers or talk to our students. And recently, as many of you are aware, we put out a district-wide survey to our parents, to our students, and to our teachers. And I believe we're getting close to, 3,500, 4,000 responses already. So we have a very robust perceptual data that is quite informative that we're going to be bringing back to the board. And all this performance data, the post-secondary data, the survey data, the anecdotal data, that's all used to inform a 5-year curriculum plan, which Dr. Vitale will be presenting in the next month. That is going to lay out our strategic plan, so to speak, for the next 5 years, where we will focus, what grade spans we will focus on, what investments that may look like, what investments in professional development for our teachers will that look like, as well as how we will support our parents in supporting their children at home. And then finally, I just said plan, execute, and evaluate. That's something that I talk about quite often. I talked about it in the interview, and I won't stop. When we think about performance, we think about becoming the best district. What do we need to do? Well, we need to plan and plan and plan, then execute thoroughly on our plan, and then always evaluating where we're at and what we can do better. So there are some results that you've seen over the past 3 months that I would say are very strong relative to some of our peers, and there's others that are not as strong. However, that doesn't mean that we can't get better, and that's what our focus will be on. If we want to be the top, then we have to work on the little things, and we have to address the big things that aren't consistent with our expectations. With that, I'll stop my presentation, and I'll hand it off to Jim for a Budget 101 presentation.
Superintendent Schaefer, in getting back to just the AP presentation, what's the passing grade? Is it 3, 4, 5? Is it 4, 5? Is it 5?
3, 4, 5, generally speaking, and it's a great question because we talked about this, I think I mentioned it before, how some of the colleges and universities will play around with that to say, well, we'll give you credit for a 5 or a 4, but not a 3. But we're going to tell you that a 3 is passing.
Right. Well, that's what I was saying, because if, passing, some colleges consider, for example, if it's in your major, you may not get credit for a 3, but if you're engineering and you took U.S. history, just as an example, you may get credit for a 3.
Yep, correct.
I think I'll stand for this one because, 2.5 hours of budget and finance, you got to get the blood flowing a little bit, right? No, I don't have 2.5 hours of material to talk about tonight, but I do have an important topic, and that is budget and finance. We're branding this the Budget 101 presentation. That is not to suggest that the topic is rudimentary in any way or basic, but we do want to level set and make sure that we're all on the same page with where the district has been and what our current status is, and set a foundation for our next budget meeting, which would be the 2022-23 preliminary budget presentation, where we talk about what's actually in that budget plan, which is congruent with many of the the initiatives that Dr. Schaefer and Dr. Vitale are working on. So thank you for the opportunity to talk tonight. Just a quick rundown of what we should expect to talk about. I'm going to talk about the timeline of events, revenues, expenses, fund balance, and debt tonight. So our timeline begins tonight to talk about the budget, although we work budget all year round. We're constantly analyzing and changing the budget, but we're formally presenting and starting the discussion publicly here tonight. Our next discussion will be on May 4th, when we again talk about and present the 2023 preliminary budget. Then we need to approve a preliminary budget at the May board meeting. The June work session will have the opportunity to talk more about the budget, specific initiatives, decisions that need to be made. And then finally, once all of that insight is gained and all the dialogue is had, on June 29th, the last Wednesday in June, we will vote on a final budget. And we follow this timeline because it's prescribed by the state of Pennsylvania. We must approve a final budget by June 30th. So we'll start by talking about revenues. Where does our money come from? What are our sources of income? And our sources of income are from three places: local, state, and federal. You can see most of our district in the blue piece of the circle here is funded locally through local taxes. And we'll talk about what types of taxes we collect here at the district. In the red piece of the graph, you'll see is state revenues, and that makes up the second largest piece. And then the piece in the green, which is usually just a nominal amount that really doesn't factor a whole lot into our revenue streams, but does this year in the form of stimulus funds, is the federal funds there. And you can see this is sort of a progression of a chart from the older years, which would be 1920 going forward toward the outside of the graph, which is our current year budget. Taking a look at the historical revenues by source, this is the same information just presented in a different way in a bar chart. You can see that our revenues have been pretty consistent. They haven't increased a ton over time. Again, I want to direct everybody's attention down here to that bottom right-hand corner. It may not look like a large bar, but it's 4% of our budget this year, which is one-time revenue, and the one-time revenues go away. Taking a look at specific line items in our local revenues, the biggest line item we have are our real estate taxes. And when you combine the current and delinquent real estate taxes together, those first two lines, you'll end up with a number somewhere around $28 million, which is more than half of our budget funded through property taxes, right? So they are the biggest part and also the least popular tax, as I'm told, and by my own volition and experience. Real estate transfer tax is an interesting one, which has taken off in the last couple of years once real estate sales really went through the roof, both in terms of volume and value. So we're seeing an abnormally high number. You see that $797,000 collection, an abnormally high variance there last year, which of course is welcome revenue to the district. Another one to highlight would be our earned income tax. Some would refer to this as the wage tax. On your W-2, you pay 1% to your local school district or municipality. 0.5% of that 1% comes to the district and is split with the local municipality. So that is a little bit more variable revenue stream, as I'll show you. So, but in good economic times, you'll see that number go up, and in poor economic times, that number will sort of decline a bit. Interest income, you can see a downward trend there. That is aligned to the downward trend in interest rates available on the market. The district is only allowed to invest in very low to no risk investments such as CDs, and we've been marketing our CDs to try to get the best, most aggressive interest rate available on the market. We think we've done a good job with it. It's just a matter of the market is declining there. Banks aren't offering it the 2% rate that they used to. They're closer to 0.5%, which is still a decent interest rate, but we'd like to see higher. And then some other ancillary revenues there on the local side. Any questions? By the way, I'd like this to be a dialogue. I don't want to sit here and just talk, for, I'm not going to say 2.5 hours, but if anyone has any questions, please just stop me and we'll go from there, okay? Now, our real estate taxes. I have a few slides on real estate taxes and millage rates that I'd like to point out. And you can see that navy blue dashed line kind of that goes across the center of the graph here. That is Abington Heights millage rate over the last, 10 years or so. And the rest of the lines on that graph are the other school districts in Lackawanna County, which follow the same assessment system, which would have equivalent type millage rates. And you can see that we start the graph at Abington Heights as the second highest millage rate in Lackawanna County, and we finish this time period as the second lowest millage rate in Lackawanna County. So there were 3 small real estate tax increases in Abington Heights at that time. I think it was 1 mil, and then just perhaps a 2 mil increase somewhere along the way there. So to take a look at it another way, to quantify that increase over time as compared to the other districts in Lackawanna County, you can see the blue bar down on the left. Abington Heights over that time period raised taxes a total of 4.7%. You can see that all other districts in Lackawanna County raised taxes very significantly higher. The next lowest raised taxes 4 times, more than 4 times the rate of Abington Heights. So we've held real estate tax rates in line over the last decade plus. You know, as I'll show you, that doesn't help generate revenue over time. Yes?
Mr. Mirabelli, is there any reason at the other school districts that they were required, other than voluntary spending on things, to raise their taxes? Did they lose federal funding relative to us, or did they not have the same level of state funding over time relative to us, or are those just decisions based on spending? Or maybe you don't know the answer to that.
So I'll have to generalize here because, you know, of course, I don't represent those districts. I could dive into some data. We do have software that allows for that to occur. But generally speaking, the reason why we didn't raise revenue is because Abington Heights has worked on the expense side of the equation so feverishly over the last decade or so. So we've worked hard to keep expenses in line. Now, all districts face the same issues, such as the pension rate going up by 4 percentage points on every dollar. We all pay 35 cents on every dollar in salary that go out the door for pension. So for every dollar in salary, 35 cents approximately goes out the door in pension. We all face the charter school issue with rising charter school tuition costs, which I'll talk to you about. So we generally have the same hands dealt to us. Now, we all have different demographics, different situations, different facilities, so I can't speak to that. But generally speaking, the reasoning behind the tax increase is that Abington Heights spends so efficiently over that period of time. Okay. So here is the other side of the equation, right? So real estate taxes are, you take your assessed value and you multiply it by the real estate tax rate, okay? So there's 2 parts of this equation. So you can't just look at the real estate or the millage rate, you also have to look at what happened in that district over that same time period. And what we're seeing is that certain districts, actually their tax base declined. You can see a couple that are below 0 up there. And then other districts saw some pretty rapid expansion. So rapid expansion, if those are taxable properties, would lead you to not have to raise taxes. And this is another factor, Mr. Azar, that may come into play as to boards' decisions in having to raise taxes or desiring to do so. So you take a look at that, and then when you combine the two, right? So in the green we see the expansion or contraction of the tax base, and in the blue you see stacked on top of that the previous graph, and that shows you the expansion plus the rate of tax increase. So your total increase in I guess taxable real estate tax revenue percent increase. So you can see Abington Heights is coming in right around 10% total growth in rate and assessed value. And the next closest, who lost value but did raise taxes at a much higher rate, is at 20%. And all the other districts in the county are comfortably above Abington Heights in raising revenue through either millage appreciation or increase in the millage rate. So when we talk about millage rate, we need to talk about the Act 1 index, okay? And the Act 1 index, I think, was passed in 2006, something like that, and went into effect, as you can see, in 2007 here. And what it says is there is a rate established annually, which is indexed basically to inflation and statewide weekly wages, that sets a cap on what boards can do in terms of raising real estate taxes. This year happens to be 3.4%, and that's kind of a historically high rate in the short history of the Act 1 index. And if you'll recall, back in, I believe it was January, this board voted to stay within the Act 1 index, right? So the only rate that the board has available to it is to raise over up to 3.4%. Now, there are limited options, even if you didn't do that, to go above that anyway, whether it be through exceptions or voter referendum. So 3.4% is your cap, and you can see in other years it was lower than 3.4%. So your opportunity to raise revenue is relatively limited. And then just an impact, yes.
Sorry. Just to quantify this a little bit with the slide that you showed in the beginning, typically our federal revenue may be around 1%. This year it's 4%. We've talked about this before, where we used the funds that we received from the stimulus to provide the students with teachers. And we mentioned reading specialists, math interventionists, reading interventionists, counselor. And that amount, that 1.2 million around there, is almost about 5 mils. Is that about right, if we put that into perspective?
That's a good approximation, I would say.
So when you talk about when we received the stimulus funds, we received stimulus funds for 2.5 years. And I've said this publicly, that I believe we did the right thing. We take a look at student achievement results. We see where some students were struggling. We needed to hire more reading specialists, more math interventionists to make sure that we close the gap. And when we talk about having to make a decision in 2 years, sometimes I'd like to quantify that decision relative to millage when we take a look at it. I mean, if you raise taxes 3.4%, that still wouldn't make up the difference that you're getting in stimulus. So, you know.
Yeah, so we do have we've set ourselves up for a bit of a fiscal cliff there, but with eyes wide open, you know, as you said, this was a need at the time. And then I'll just call it's not displaying very clearly in the top, but I usually get questions about impact. So the value of 1 mil, if you raise taxes by 1 mil, is $220,000. If you went to the limit of 3.4%, that's $815,000. The impact to the taxpayer, which is also critical, is 1 mil would be a $20 increase on the median tax, on the median assessed household, and 4 mils would be approximately $80 to the median household.
So the example that I just gave then, what that turns out to the median home owner would be $100. I was giving an example
teachers.
that the additional federal money, the stimulus at 1.2, and what that means if you were to, you know, hypothetically cover that.
To fill that gap. Right. Yeah.
So these percentages, the index, these are the percentages that, I know it's a cap, but it's a cap on, if you hit the cap, that's 3.4% of our gross prior year tax revenues. Is that right? I know the millage is a separate number, but this is.
So it would, you can increase your millage rate by that amount. So if your base erodes by 3.5% and you raise by 3.4, you still went down 0.1% in overall revenue.
So if I saw, recall, the millage rate for Abington Heights was about 212 mils. So then that 3.4% would be on 212 mils, if I'm not mistaken.
122, but you're
122,
right there,
oh,
yeah,
well,
right
that's-
there. I think
Okay,
maybe I had a
120.
typo here, but yes.
Point is, 3.4% on
Yeah, so it would come out, 3.4% is almost, it's right around 4 mils
Okay.
on the nose. So anything else on tax rates or Act 1 index? Okay. Our other major revenue local source is the earned income tax, and you can see this one's a little bit more variable. In good economic times, we generally see an increase, and poor economic times, we generally see a decrease, but we do see a good positive trend here. That final year is not falling off the table. That's a year-to-date amount, and we do collect this through August. So we're about halfway through the year on this particular graph because that's through February. Pivoting now to state revenues, and you can see our basic ed funding is our biggest state revenue source, followed by reimbursement of retirement, which is pension, and Social Security, right? So now that line item, the retirement contribution reimbursement, has actually increased over time. However, this is one that you don't want to increase because in order to get the reimbursement, the state reimburses you 50% back of what you pay out. So if your reimbursement's going up, that means your cost is going up double that amount, right? So you have to pay $1 to get 50 cents.
So that 35 cents for every dollar, are we getting back half of that, or are we actually spending 70 cents? and getting back 35?
So you spend 35 cents on every dollar, and you're getting back 17.5%. And I'm using round numbers. The rate's a couple tenths different. But yeah, that's it. So if you want to know your total pension expense for 2021, 3.8 times 2, you got what, 6.6 or 7.6? Sorry. So yeah, so that is the one line item that continues to go up. But that is one reason why the state is unable to put forth as much of an increase in the basic ed subsidy as they would like. You can see from 1920 to 21, our subsidy actually went down just a couple of dollars, which is considered to be flat funding. But we rarely see anything more than 1 or 2% in that category, and that certainly does not take care of the inflationary pressures that we face in our budget. So any questions on any of those specific line items?
Yes, as the state starts to look at public school funding, and of course, it's a pretty big topic, I know they're also talking about changing the formula. How is that, the changes that they're discussing, going to affect Abington Heights?
So a lot of what is being discussed is that there's a floor, and no district will receive less, and I think they call that hold harmless is the term they use. So I don't think that would impact us in a negative way, in the sense that we would lose revenue. But I do believe that we aren't in the position to be the biggest gainers from a new funding formula. Those funding formulas tend to I don't want to characterize what schools, but a little more higher poverty schools usually are negatively affected by the funding formula. Did I say that correctly?
I think so. Mr. Mirabelli, is the equation for additional funds, or is that for all, the whole fund from the state? Because I thought the hold harmless only applies to additional funds from the previous year.
Right, so the second part of my answer was I was speculating what would happen if the hold harmless wasn't there. So I believe we have a floor. I believe we're good at that $6.5 million number, 6.6. Hopefully we see an increase here. The governor has proposed some landmark investments, mostly for districts not named Abington Heights. But, certainly we would stand to get a few dollars. In some models, I've seen some models where we could make out okay, but I never believe any of those models, because they come out with really good numbers and then they get negotiated down.
It would seem that they're going to direct a majority of their dollars perhaps to schools with a different socioeconomic level than Abington Heights.
Yes, and that's the way the formula is designed, yes, to give equitable in their funding, so, yes. Any other questions on the state revenue? Okay. Here's an interesting, it's not the best visual representation here, but what we see in this little wave-like, I guess my laser's not working, but this little wave-like descending graph is, each bar on that graph is one of 500 districts. And this is the revenue per student. So what does each district bring in per student? And if you want to find Abington Heights, you have to look all the way over here to the right, that little orange sliver. Abington Heights brings in $14,039 total, federal, state, and local per student. And that is the 8th lowest in the state. So we're a bit of an outlier. We're a low revenue school from a state, federal, and certainly local perspective. Quick look at the federal revenues. Our federal revenues are usually the title grants, Title I reading and math, Title II, and Title IV. But we also get medical assistance as well. But the new one are the federal COVID grants, and you can see that those amounts have increased drastically over the 3-year period shown here. Any questions on this slide? What I wanted to do with this graph, and it's a little bit busy, but what I wanted to do is show you all of the SR-ARP grants, and I wanted to sort of lay them out over time as we have them earmarked, right? So you have your allocations in column 2, right? And then you have, in 2021, we spent the first ESSER grant. 21-22, you can see where each allocation is being used. 2023, you have ESSER 2 and ARP that remain. And in 2023-24, ESSER 2 falls off. So you have a step down of about $500,000 that the district will have to make up in some way. And then in 23-24, we have another step down of almost $900,000. So that's how it lays out over time, just so you can sort of visually see what those stimulus funds look like. Anyone have any questions on this?
So we basically have 2 years to make up the funds that are going to drop off.
It's essentially there's a cliff looming.
In 2 years, we have to
Yes.
have a plan in place to make up for that.
Yeah, there's a significant step up needed in revenue, or the latter, which we've been working hard at over the last decade plus. So, and now we get a lot of questions, and we talk a lot about what do we use these funds for. And I wrote down. I went to every grant application that we filed. I wrote down what is in the grant application in summary, and generally speaking, with the exception of phonemic awareness, professional development, we are using those on salaries and benefits for staff to address learning loss and other needs that have been identified through the pandemic. And all of this, I have the link in this presentation. This presentation's already up on the Business Administrator page on ahsd.org. And this, as well as the specific grants that have been approved by the state, are published to the Business Administrator website. So those are all available publicly. Now we'll talk about the expenditure side. And here's a similar graph to show where we spend our revenue on. And some people are taken back by the figure of salary and benefits. When you stack the blue and the red pieces of this chart on top of one another, salary and benefits make up 76% of Abington Heights' budget. And that may be a jarring figure, but we're in the business of people, educating people. We need people to complete our mission. So 76% is historically high for us because of the addition of the 10 staff members that we brought on, but it's not out of line. We traditionally run 74, 75%. and it's not out of line with other districts. And you really, it's hard to compare apples to apples because every different district has different scenarios, but all districts have high salary and benefit cost structures, right? And you can just see how that expands, though the blue and the red kind of take a bigger piece of the pie as we expand into those outer rings. Looking at that same information over time, there's a lot going on this slide here. What we do here is we stack salary in the blue. I'm colorblind, that might be purple. And then we have red on top of the blue, that's medical benefits. And then on top of that is green, that's your retirement. And just take a minute and take a look at the expansion of those retirement benefits over the course of that time. We were referring to this as the pension crisis, right? Because the rate used to be 2%, and then it went to 4%, and then it went to 8% of every dollar in salary. And those are massive increases of 200,000, 800,000. Like they were really, the only way, and that was another situation where we couldn't raise taxes out of this problem, so we worked on the expense side of the equation during this time. A little more detailed look at this. I'm not sure why that's not showing up, but this is just a pictures. And I want to just call out the purchased property service, purchased professional service, and other purchased services. Those are things that the district pays for, such as transportation. We subcontract that out. We subcontract out some cleaning services. These are your utility bills, your electric, your gas, your water. These are special education services. These are charter school expenses, all in those three categories there. So anything that our people aren't doing would fall in the purchased services category. Supplies would be books, pencils, also technology, things of that nature. Air filters to go in the vents, all sorts of supplies. And you will see our debt service number, which we'll talk about here in a second. Any questions there? So I want to talk about salary growth. And over time, as I said, we had reduced salaries despite paying increases on the wage basis. But the difference between the 21 and 22 bars there in the salary is $1.4 million. And that can very easily be explained by the 10 staff members that we brought on, as well as paying the contractual increases to our employees, which is about an $800,000 annual increase when you consider salary and the fixed costs that go. So that is another cost that we have to wrestle with, is paying increasing wages over time, right? So that's another, to maintain the workforce you have, obviously you have to pay them and continue to pay at a higher rate as they are here. Here is the head count of all of the employees that we have in the district over time, right? And you can see the decreasing head count, and this is magnified a bit by subcontracting of some support staff positions, namely clerical and custodial. But if you take a look at the professional staff, which I've carved out on this slide, you can see where we've gone and now where we are, right? So the area under that red bar between these two represents millions and millions and millions of dollars saved over that time period, right? If we had all of those people that whole time, the real estate tax rate would have looked a lot different. But this is the reality as to why, when we talk about low spending, we lowered our head count, quite frankly, with the enrollment decline that we've seen over time. So what we've done is restore the number of positions essentially to above where it was in 2011. And now here's what the enrollment trend looks like over time as to why those reductions in staff were available and in some cases very necessary because, as the enrollment goes down, you have a less need for folks to educate them. Whether that would drive up class size every time you cut, but the rationale used is to reduce expenses by reducing headcount because we're in a situation of declining enrollment. You can see that it ticks up a little in recent years, but still pretty steady. If you look at the differences between that whole time period, you have a 7.2% decline in student enrollment from 2005 to current. Any questions there? Yes.
Do we have other districts enrollment, if they've increased or decreased?
We certainly do, and you can see that
From the one slide that showed 4, maybe I'm just reading, the one slide that 4 showed, like an increase, everybody was increasing, we were a little blue.
Oh, the taxes?
Yeah.
So as a general statement, I will say many districts are in a declining enrollment period, but I do have that data and I can bring that back to you at next meeting. So if I could just take a quick note.
Jim, the previous slide, okay, so that was 11 and 12, that we had 255 staff members. So now move forward. And if I take a look at that, the enrollment was about 3452, and we're at 3378 now, so it's about 70 students difference, right? And I just want to call that out because when we take a look at the slide that you showed before, and you talked about increasing expenses, and we did a good job over a 10-year period of not raising taxes, and we did that through cost cutting, through staffing. Is that correct?
And among other initiatives, but 76% of your spend is here, so this would have the largest impact.
Right. Okay.
It would be safe to assume that as that employment figure went down, that the number of students per class on average went up?
I think that'd be a fair assumption.
Yeah, the reason why I was just in my mind, and maybe we'll really dig into this, 70 students, we'll call that 3.5 teachers, right? If we even said 20 per classroom, and what we're looking at there was a 246, 243, 243, 242, 246. Those are some pretty big cuts. And when we take a look at where we are this year and using the stimulus money to have those additional 9 staff members or 11 staff members, those aren't unnecessary. I mean, these were needed positions, and I'm not necessarily making a statement here. I'm just trying to put some things in context, where we were to where we are right now.
Okay, so we talked about enrollment, and now here's a graph, spending per student, right? So what this is you take your total cost, your total budget, and you divide it by the number of students that you have. And what you see here are 4 lines on the graph. The green line is the state average of spending per student, and that state average of spending per student is $16,875 per kid. Abington Heights spends in 2020 $13,176 per student. Our peer group, who has similar demographics and enrollments to us, spends very similar to the state average, as well as those in our region. As you can see, they're clustered very tightly together. But I just wanted to illustrate that if Abington Heights was an average spending district, just average, median, in the middle, that would represent a 22% increase in our expenditures and a necessary increase in our revenues of 22%, which we've already said we cannot do. We cannot solve that in a year. But that would take your budget from $47.6 million to $58 million if you were just average. So it's over a $10 million add-on to your budget. And we've presented similar things like this in the past, but it is striking when you look at the difference between an average district and Abington Heights. Another way to look at that is spending per pupil ranking, and this may or may not be the best way to present it, but you can see, the bars sort of come down from the top, and the longer the bar or the lower it extends indicates a lower rank out of 500 districts in the state. So you can see in 2020, Abington Heights was 462 out of 500 districts in the Commonwealth as far as spending per pupil. And that shouldn't be a surprise after seeing this as well. However, yes, sir.
So what you're saying is there are only, if there are 500 districts in the state, there's only 18 school districts that spend less per student than we do. We did in 2020.
Yes. But a more encouraging sign is when you look at the percentage of your budget which you spend on instruction, which is in the classroom, which is salaries and benefits of teachers, which is supplies that go into the classroom, things of that nature. The percentage of your total budget which goes into instruction, Abington Heights ranks pretty high. So in 2020, Abington Heights ranked 154th out of 500 in terms of dollars that percent of budget that flows into the classroom. Does that make sense? Okay.
So you're saying on a relative basis, we spend more for instructional expenses than other schools?
On a relative percentage of budget basis, yes. So the next thing I want to talk about is our biggest challenge that we're facing financially, aside from the sort of fiscal cliff that we have looming, and that is charter school costs. When the commercials tell you it's free, it's not free to Abington Heights, and it's not free to any other district in Pennsylvania. In fact, the tuition rates are $11,120 of taxpayer money that goes to the charter schools for a regular ed student, and $20,674 for a special ed student that go to the cyber charter and brick and mortar charter schools. So if you look at that trend, I used to describe the trends early, those increases to 300,000 to 100,000. I would describe that as a crisis in those times. But when you go from 2019 of just under $1 million to 2020, where we spent $2 million on charter and cyber charter schools, that is just an increase of a magnitude that you cannot absorb, and again, with the Act 1 index, cannot tax your way out of. You can see that number came down. We project it to come down to finish the year. That's not a year-to-date spend. That's a projection as to where we believe we will end the year, $1.8 million. So still much, much higher than the trend. So here's what the enrollment looks like there. You can see pretty big expansion, which correlates obviously to the total tuition paid. 84% of the students in those bars go to cyber charter schools. Most of them go to Commonwealth Connections Academy.
Do you know what percentage of the increase was to brick and mortar?
It was pretty negligible. It was mostly cyber.
Basically all cyber charter.
Yes, yeah. So now I want to talk about governmental funds and debt. And really governmental funds is a fancy word for couple different checkbooks, right? So we'll try to talk about it in terms of household finances, right? So the district has several different funds. The main fund, the fund that we've talked about the entire time tonight, is the general fund. You will pass a general fund budget preliminarily in May, and a general fund budget final in June. So that is where we direct almost all of our attention. That is where most of the activity flows, right? So to use the household analogy, your light bill's coming out of this. Your car payment comes out of this. All of your general household expenses come out of that, right? But if you're saving up to renovate your kitchen, the equivalent in a school district would be the capital reserve fund, right? And the capital reserve fund has currently a balance of $5.6 million. And I'll show you what that forecasts out after we accomplish a few of the projects that we have slated for the summertime. Those items, so that those dollars can only be used for exactly what it says, capital projects, which means infrastructure, right? So it could be technology, it could be technology with respect to infrastructure in the building, like wires, our phone system, the three projects that we'll talk about in a second, technology-wise, that are infrastructure related. But you can't say buy computers or Chromebooks with it, but you can use it for other things. The other funds we have are the health insurance fund. We're self-insured here at Abington Heights, which means we pay our own claims, right? We do buy some insurance, it's called stop-loss insurance. So we contract with a company to buy off the top end of the risk, right? So it's about $185,000 per person. We would pay the first $185,000 on any one person on our plan. The rest would go to stop-loss. So we do purchase insurance, but we're largely self-insured. So we take on a lot of risk, right? And many years, on the average, 3 out of 5 are good for you when you do that. But on the average, 2 out of 5 are bad years, and sometimes you need that fund balance to kick in. And sometimes the general fund may need a break on the, quote, premiums that we pay ourselves. So that can be used in a variety of ways, but it's only there to pay health insurance claims. The general fund pays the, I'm using quotes, premium to the health insurance fund, and then whatever the claims are, you either make out better or worse. We've had years where we've lost $1 million in that fund. We've had some years where we didn't have to pay ourselves the final 2 months of premium payments, and we clawed that back. That was 2 years ago, and that helped us offset some of that charter school increase, but that was a one-time saving. So there are some benefits, but also some risks to a health insurance fund, but that is there, right? We have a food service fund, which operates as a nonprofit, and over the last 2 years, we were unable to get any major projects going with the pandemic and things that were going on, but we've paid for things when the dishwasher goes bad and the garbage disposal goes bad, the food disposal goes bad in the kitchen. We don't have to charge the taxpayers for those repairs and improvements. We need a couple of ovens in the kitchen. We don't have to charge the taxpayers for that. Right. Now this because of the way the funding has gone over the last 2 years, where all lunches are free and subsidized at a much higher rate, we usually don't have this type of balance in our account, but we do have a number of improvements to make in the cafeterias here. So we were actually able to buy more cafeteria tables at the middle school to get some more spacing when we needed it. Took a lot longer than we wanted to get them here, but this was something that the taxpayers didn't have to pay for.
Jim, could you explain a little bit more how those three funds are only one direction? Once they're in those funds, you can't pull them out. And the other thing is, with the food service fund, what that fund can be utilized for?
Sure.
And also how we don't set the cost of the meals. Isn't that comes from the state or the federal government?
So we do actually decide the cost of a regular price meal. We happen to have not raised it in about 5 years. But the reimbursement for a free, reduced, and regular lunch is determined by the state and federal government. And to your other question, I'm sorry. The health insurance fund, again, premiums go in and claims go out. You can't just say, I'm going to withdraw, $500,000 out of the health insurance fund to pay for, I don't know, a parking lot or something like that. But the capital reserve fund is the same way. You can't transfer it back to the general fund to pay the light bill, but you can do a parking lot with that, right? Food service fund has to be used for food service related things, has to go back into the program, right? Has to benefit the students that use the program. And the debt service fund is it's an in and out. We have to pay our bondholders through a mechanism where we pay the debt service fund and then the bond paying agent withdraws the money and pays. So that has a zero balance, but that's how it works. That's a one-way street too.
So when you look at the general fund, it's $8.5 million of that is committed, and an additional $2 million is not. So that's a total of $10.5 million, if I understand. And my question is, what sorts of things are in the assigned or committed category for that fund that limit our spending on that, from that?
Great question. I'm sorry I skipped over that. So they are assigned for two things. That would be future employee benefit increases, pension, medical, things of that nature, as well as capital projects.
And how does that differ from the capital reserve fund?
So the board has the discretion to assign and unassigned funds as it so wishes. If it was restricted, that's a different story, but assigning of fund balance is common practice that boards do in the state of Pennsylvania. There's also a cap by the state of how much unassigned fund balance you may have. The district has a 3.6% and the threshold of the state for a budget of our size is 8%. So we're well under that with the arrangement that we have here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
I had a couple questions. So the capital reserve fund, once the funds go in, they can't come out. So if we run a deficit in a given year, which we haven't done in a while, I don't think, but if we did, it would have to come out of the general fund reserves, you can't pull from the capital to cover a deficit. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So the money that's in those capital reserve funds, it's not like that's a backstop liquidity to our operations. It's really just for capital.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. So the money that is in the health insurance reserve fund, is that only in there from surplus premiums that have been paid, or have we funded that over time? And if it's the latter, how does that happen?
So that balance has been hovering in that range for quite some time, right? So we had one year that I can recall that was a bad year where the premiums were significantly lower than what the claims were. So we ended up having a surplus in the general fund, so we reimbursed that fund back in that particular year for the deficit that occurred in the health insurance fund.
So the money that's in that, the $7.5 million that's in there is not just from excess premiums. It's actually the board historically has, at times in the past, put money into that reserve?
When they were ramping it up in its inception, which was, it was well before my time.
Okay. And then, sorry, I just had a bunch of questions on all these reserves. The capital reserve fund, that is optionally been put into reserve by the board in the past, right? Sometimes from surplus years or other?
Yeah, so for example, the previous fiscal year, we had some revenues that broke our way, right? And we had some pandemic-related savings with buildings being closed where we didn't spend what was budgeted in some areas, and we took that surplus and moved it to the capital reserve, knowing that there are projects on the horizon.
Okay, thank you.
So on the health self-insurance fund, correct me if I'm wrong, we have stop loss insurance for high claims, correct?
Yes, sir.
So the cost of the stop loss insurance is in some fashion related to the balance we have. The higher the balance, the lower the premium we pay for stop loss insurance, correct? I mean, there's obviously a trade-off. We can get too high.
Correct, yes. So there's that cap there where we know if everything goes wrong, we're probably, even with the stop loss, going to, you know, lose a lot of that balance there. But that's, you know, about a year's worth of premium.
My only point is, as that balance goes down, potentially the cost of the stop-loss insurance is going to go up.
Yes, most definitely, most definitely. So we'll be more fully insured than
So
we are.
you're more exposed because you have a lower balance, but you also have a problem because now you have an expenditure that's increasing.
Correct. More of a fixed cost,
Yes.
if you will,
Yep.
than the variable that, you know. Yes, sir.
180,000, I think, is the stop loss.
Mhm.
Is that for a person for life or for a year?
Annually, yeah, annually. And sometimes, I don't think I'm getting too far in the weeds here, but sometimes the stop-loss carrier will they will identify a case ahead of time, and they will do what's called a laser, which means all bets are off on that case. It's been a pretty, we bid it out each year, and we're aware of those lasers, and we haven't seen too many of them, but they do exist. But it's an annual thing. And then our aggregate spec, as they call it, is about $7.5 million, which is so if everything goes wrong, we're going to spend $7.5 million. Luckily, it hasn't yet. Is this real wood? Any other questions on that there? Okay. Let me catch up. Oh, the capital reserve, yes.
Sir, why don't you wait for the public comments, and we'll be happy to answer your questions at that time.
I just had a quick question for about the services. I do have a slide on that. Yeah.
Please let him finish, and then by all means, we're happy to help you out.
So the capital reserve fund, let me just run through these projects here that we've decided upon over the last few meetings. The South Abington roof project, that roof has gone beyond its useful life. We're seeing some leaks, and we are going to be redoing that roof at a cost of about $385,000, which will come out of the capital reserve fund. We have a technology network infrastructure project that will, as I understand it, improve our ability to allow more devices to communicate on our network at greater speeds, and prepare us to, kind of get into the future here, or at least bring us up to current. Is that fair?
I would focus on bringing us up to current.
Okay.
Yeah, we're not into the future, that's next year.
Trying to choose my words carefully.
Oh, you said it right.
Okay. And then another infrastructure cost would be, we currently have microwaves to communicate our internet between the buildings, which has been a great tool for us. But once in a while we see, I think they're called latency issues, where the signals from other antennas or dishes can cause interference. So when you have different equipment with an FCC licensed band, no one else can operate on that band. And we're pursuing that with some grant funding through E-rate to improve that, and the balance will come out of capital reserve. And then we have a server replacement, which runs all of the brains of our district, which is sorely in need of replacing. Certainly part of the infrastructure here, and that's at a cost of about $200,000. But as tech projects go, I built in a little reserve there. Then we received back the state police safety audit report. 6 reports, actually, one for each school. Great reading. And we didn't get any estimates yet, but the magnitude of it occurs to us. It could be in the $500,000 range of security upgrades that are recommended by the state police. Would that be fair, Dr. Schaefer?
Yeah, and again, that is a somewhat arbitrary figure. And what I wanted to mention here is when we think about the capital reserve fund and what the board has done recently, as you can see, particularly with the technology committee bringing us up to speed where we need to be, and certainly there can be some more investments that way. These are what I would characterize as near-term projects. These are things that we have the funds and plans to go out and do. We have the capacity to project manage if needed for these. And as you aptly framed it, this is the purpose of having that capital reserve as we're putting money away to fix the kitchen, so to speak. And I frame that next to what the board approved maybe a month or so ago, and that is the K-12 facility assessment. The capital reserve fund would not be the appropriate mechanism to fund some long-term, high-dollar projects. So I want to make sure that we're, framing that the right way. So when we talked about, we put out a facility study, a facility assessment. We'll take a look at all the facilities. When we get those results back and take a look at it, we're not going to say, well, let's take a look at the capital reserve and the $4 million to address some of these larger issues.
At the bottom of that slide, I just put a few examples of items that we paid for out of the Capital Reserve Fund. Most recently, the high school track and turf field project, that was $1.8 million. Clark Summit Elementary roof, $870,000. The high school roof, we did a portion of it, somewhat forced to do so when a portion of it blew off. With the help of some insurance money, we did the high school roof and the skylights. The phone system upgrade was just over $200,000, and also the security door access control, the swipe cards that you see at the entrances, was done at a cost of about $230,000 out of the Capital Reserve Fund. So those are the types of projects that you can fund out of this. Of course, you need funds available to do the funding, but so that's where we project to be about $4.4 million left after all of these initiatives. Now on to the debt. This is what I call a debt aging schedule. So we have a series of 2015 bond with 5 years remaining on it, soon to be 4 years when we wrap up this fiscal year. And we also have the 2009 lease, which was the energy savings project in HVAC and roof replacement up at the middle school, right? So we did a new roof and lighting. This is before my time, but that's the nature of the project there. And that will be paid off a little over 2 years from now, and you can see where that lease payment falls off. So you have a small debt payment coming off 2 years from now, and 4 years from now, much more significant debt coming off, $700,000 annually. And you can see at the bottom, now it's not exactly related to debt, but in the red text there, I show you where the ESSER 2 money expires and where the ESSER 3 money expires. So you have that cliff, you get about $200,000 worth of help, but you still have 2 years until you get out of debt, so to speak. Any questions on that?
Theoretically, though, if you maintain the current course and we didn't do anything, you'd be out of debt. You'd be debt-free in 4 years. 5 years.
Yeah, after this fiscal year, 4 years, yes. Okay. Mm-hmm. Here's our debt load as we compare to other districts. Our debt to revenue ratio, which is your debt compared to your size of your budget, is 8%. The average debt to revenue ratio in the state of Pennsylvania is about 66%. The median is about 62%. And our debt to revenue ratio rank is 466 out of 499. Just to give you some perspective on where we sit with our debt. So we're a low spending, low debt And part of our low spending is because we are low debt. So those two are very much correlated. District. Any questions on that? Okay. So then, I'll wrap it up here by saying, here's the major budget challenges before us, and I sort of spoke about these. The stimulus funds expiring after 23 and 24. Replacing of the stimulus fund revenue to fund the additional positions is a challenge. Financing future facilities improvement projects, that would be another challenge for long-term planning. Limitations of the Act 1 index, as we discussed, skyrocketing charter schools costs, rising salary and benefit costs, and inflationary drivers throughout the budget, such as transportation, utilities, supplies, services, et cetera. And all of this information, as I said, is on the Business Administrator page on ahsd.org, including this presentation. And any further questions at this time?
Any questions from the board? Dr. Schaefer, that pretty much concludes the superintendent. So if there are questions now on the presentation, by all means, please.
Okay.
I thought that might happen. Okay. Any other questions on the budget presentation from, before we get into public comment?
Very much
Mr.
appreciate
Mirabelli, thank you for a great job. That was
Thank you, Jim.
very, very good
Thanks,
job.
Jim.
Okay, the next is, of course, public comment. Normally we have asked you to fill out cards and so on. We don't have any tonight, so I'm going to ask you to raise your hand and just come forward and tell us who you are. Hang on, Mr. Sheehan, just a minute. And of course, we're going to ask you to keep your comments to around 3 minutes, please. And with that, it looks to me like Mr. Sheehan is warming up and getting ready. So, Mr. Sheehan, welcome again.
Thank you. Got some handouts here. There's enough here for everybody, including those who are absent, so if someone would provide those two who are absent with copies, would appreciate it. All right, all across the country, states and school districts are producing written policies prohibiting certain concepts, including CRT, and what you have in front of you here, what I just handed out, are 3 samples from various locations. And I guess they all say pretty much the same, so, you know, I'm not gonna stand here and read the whole thing, so you can read it at your leisure, but school board policy prohibiting concepts based on race, ethnicity, or sex. And this one is from Arizona. I guess the front page is from Arizona. And you can read that one: race, ethnicity, or sex is inherently forbidding promoting teaching of one race, ethnicity, or sex inherently morally or intellectually superior to another race, and so on. Of the 3 that are here, by the way, just earlier today, as I was preparing to come here, I read that school district in California, no, I can't think of the name of it, it's in Orange County anyway, has published or produced a policy forbidding teaching of CRT and the other things I'm talking about here. So there's nothing more significant about that particular school district because of the fact that it's in California and not in particularly what we call conservative area. So these policies are coming up, they're being, coming out more and more often as the time goes on. The third one is the one that says the school board policy on dignity and non-discrimination. And the printing, some of the words at the end of the line are cut off, but I think you can pretty well figure out what they mean. It is the intent of the board that administrators, faculty members, other employees and students, including charter schools, respect the dignity of others, acknowledge the right of others to express differing opinions, and foster and defend intellectual honesty, freedom of inquiry and discussion, and freedom of speech and association. The board finds these tenets often found in critical race theory, inflame divisions on the basis of sex, race, ethnicity, religion, color, national origin, no school district, and so on. So I'll like you to read it. It's pretty straightforward. And I have talked before about what's behind this effort that's going on across the country. Am I getting close?
You're over.
What?
You're already over. But please finish up.
So, the next time, when I get back the next time, I'm going to try to remember. I told you about a book that was written back in the 50s called The Naked Communist. It contained a list of objectives of the Communist Party in the United States Communist Party. And if you read through that list and look at some of the things that have already been accomplished, some of you are shaking your heads, so you're already familiar with it. We're going to bring that list in next week. I believe this critical race theory and this other stuff is done for the purpose of it is to promote Marxism. And they're doing it through your children. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sheehan. Anyone else?
Hi, I'm Maggie Roberts.
Maggie, would you move the microphone?
Sure. Can you hear me? I'm just going to follow up what Mr. Sheehan said, because I think the point he's trying to make is if you guys have the power to raise our taxes, then certainly you have the power to make a policy that would exclude any of this teaching from our school district. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Scandell? Nice to see you again.
Yeah, good evening. Amy Scandell, Waverly. I had the question, and Rachel, who was not here, had just emailed it, so I'm going to kind of summarize hers. This is to Dr. Schaefer. Would you be willing to share the data for benchmark assessments for ELA and math K through 12? I see science, biology, AP classes, I mean, that's the gap we're talking about, right? And I'm not sure if you covered that last. That would be my main focus, and I think most parents' main focus.
No problem.
Yeah, that would be great.
And we've been, I think, pretty transparent about that. We have benchmarks in only certain grades and certain subjects, and one of the things that we want to do is make sure that we can identify the gap before it becomes problematic. And we've shown some of the, what we call Ames Web results early on, but certainly that's something that we can do.
Yeah, especially it sounds like you have reading and math specialists with the ESSR 3 money, but we don't have the data. It'd be nice to see 4 to 5 years back with that.
I can't speak for 4 to 5 years back.
Or the PSSAs, yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah, because tonight the PSSAs were just science, biology, world languages, not AP classes, I believe. I was wondering if we have K through 12.
All the way, if you go back to my January presentation.
Was it in there?
You'll get
Okay,
ELA,
I may have missed it. Okay.
And then February, you'll get all the math and all
Of what the gap was. Okay, all right.
So you'll be able to get all that. And then Rachel sent an email about the benchmarks, and we can do that.
Right, that'd be great.
You know, we have no problem giving you what we have.
Yes. Okay, perfect, thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, thank you very much for your participation tonight. As I recall, there are no action discussion items for tonight. Is there any additional informational items? New business? Old business? We have another chance for public comment on a work session, but I think we're good. So with that, I'd like to adjourn the meeting, and thank you all for being here.